Good morning. Good morning to all of you. My name is Fabio Bargiacchi. I'm the founder and executive director of the European Center for Electoral Support, which is an independent, non-partisan, and not-for-profit foundation. We've been establishing ourselves in 2010, and so far we had the possibility to implement activity already in more than 50 countries, mostly in Africa and the Middle East, and primarily with the funding of the European Union and the European Union member states. We target the promotion of electoral democracy strengthening, and practically we gave ourselves the mission to facilitate the electoral cooperations between the European Union member states, and the partner countries of the European Union member states that are requesting this kind of assistance. We are implementing our projects and activity following our own approach, which we call European Response to Electoral Cycle Support. That is merely a delivery mechanism to implement electoral and democracy assistance activities, which is consistent primarily with the policy and procedures of the European Union and European Union member states. We, together with the College of Europe, we are also implementing a project which is called European Resource for Mediation Support, which is an important tool for the European Union when it comes to mediation and dialogue worldwide. And in this context, we are also proud to be a member of the European Peacebuilding Liaison Office Network, which is the biggest leading civil society European network in Europe, comprising 40 organizations and foundations dealing with the peace building and prevention of conflict. So I want to welcome you all, panelists and participants, to the seminar on strengthening the capacity of electoral stakeholders in Africa within the context of the European Union partnership with the African Union. We are honored to say that this seminar is a side event to the Africa-Europe Week that we have organized with the support of the Italian Foreign Affairs Ministry and the European Commission. And we are also proud to say that we have received the endorsement and the patronage of the Prime Minister Office from Italy. We are convening this seminar against the backdrop of a project that we are implementing since the end of 2020, where during the time of the COVID crisis, we had the possibility, thanks to the funding of the Italian Foreign Affairs Minister, to continue to provide capacity development peer exchanges to electoral management bodies and electoral stakeholders in Africa, together in collaboration with the African Union and with the other regional economic community that are dealing with electoral observation and electoral assistance, like ECOWAS, SADC, ECAS. The project is called Innov Elections, and as I was saying, funded by Italy. In the last year, had the possibility to reach more than 1,000 people in 35 countries when it comes to deliver capacity development and peer exchange, also thanks to the collaboration we have with the University of Sant'Anna to deliver the unique online master on electoral policy and administrations. It is therefore time to discuss between us the different activity that we have implemented. That's why we have gathered this seminar. And in consideration of what we have done already in 2020, the Italian Foreign Affairs Minister in Italy has decided to provide a further financial tranche in order to start the activity for the implementation of a memorandum of understanding that we have signed proudly with the African Union when it comes to contribute to electoral integrity, preventing electoral conflicts, and increase of the role of women and disadvantaged groups in elections. Therefore, we will have a first introductory panel and then two panels, and we will finalize at 12:30, hopefully. And I have now the pleasure to hand over the moderation of the opening sessions with such distinguished guests to Erastus Muencha, former Deputy Chairperson of the African Union for 2 mandates, and now also part of the Strategic Advisory Committee of ECAS. Thank you. Erastus, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, my good friend Pashu, for your statement. And also, may I use this occasion to welcome everyone to this important seminar. As he has mentioned this in remarks, democracy is on decline globally. This has been exacerbated by, among other many things, the COVID pandemic. The EU member states, the European Union itself, Commission and AU, need to adapt to other major global challenges that are attacking democracy even before the pandemic. Electoral support can play a crucial role in counterbalancing negative trends, removing institutional barriers and obstacles to organize credible, inclusive, and transparent electoral processes. Electoral support needs not only to be long in time and larger in scope, but it must be given at the right time with the right measures under the broader aspect of stabilization and crisis response bracket. While elections are technical in nature, and this we know, administrative and operational processes, of course, they are still the calm of political competition and marred by many tensions. This makes elections processes unpredictable and a potential trigger for a set of greater conflicts, particularly in young democracies or in countries in transition. Our opening session is framed around the title, Italian and European Partnership with Africa on Democracy Consolidation and Support through the Elections Project. It is my pleasure to introduce the panelists, this great panel here, starting with my good friend, His Excellency Romano Prodi, former Italian Prime Minister and former President of the European Commission, who is joining us virtually from Rome. But with us here on the podium in this residence palace, we welcome Her Excellency Marina Sereni, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy, Her Excellency Emmanuel Delay, EU Special Representative for the Sahel. And this is an important area and important theater that I'm sure you all know that deserves great attention internationally. We also welcome Christina Koknakis, Director of Values, Multilateral Relations, and Deputy Managing Director of Managing Directorate Global. Mrs. Chiara Adamo, Director of Human Development, Migration, Governance, and Peace International Partnership, European Commission. We also have with us, not yet arrived, but is on his way, His Excellency Bankole Adoye, Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, African Union. But in case he doesn't make it in time, we have seated in front here the director for that very division, Acting Director Kaliste Mbari, who is really a pillar of the Commission in that very department of political affairs, peace, and security. I know that we have lost a bit of our time and we need to finish this session by 9 if you look at our program. So I want to plead with my panelists who are here that please try to contain your statement within 5 minutes so that we can manage time and to finish as you heard, by 12:30, where we can continue to interact during lunch break. And just to let you know that lunch will also at that time be served so that we can continue our conversation. It's now my great honor and pleasure to invite our first speaker of the day, His Excellency Romano Prodi, to share his thoughts and experiences on the subject matter. Mr. President.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be with you, with a bit of nostalgia, of course, you know, because I spent so many years not on the specific subject of election, but how to work in a democratic way with all African countries and with the African Union, you know. My task today is only to give you a wish, because I am not technically expert of the new events that we have now in the evolution of electoral process. But no, I am obliged, sorry, but I am obliged to start with the observation of my friend Erasmus. Democracy is a retreat, you know. And also elections are under danger because they are not anymore reputed as the first step for democracy. Look, I had an experience of what is happening in the world and in Africa. Look, when 60 years ago, the process of decolonization and political change in Africa, it was longer. In that time, very young people, the idea that democracy was flourishing was coming by nature, you know. And then it started well with a great hope, and then, you know, we had such a slow speed of this process. And also, look, what surprises me that many leaders democratically appointed, they changed the idea after the power, you know, and they were the first enemy, or the first type of people opposing the elections, the fair evolutions of the elections, you know. But what worries me more is that, as Erasmus hinted, there is a word process of denigrating or abandoning democracy. Even, you know, it seems that there are not anymore in the world rights recognized by everybody. You know, when I was president of the European Commission or Prime Minister in Italy, when we had conversation with Chinese leaders or others, you know, it was, the conversation was starting, I don't say with recognition of democratic superiority or, but with the idea that democracy had some sort of general recognized values and goals. Now there is some sort of denying this process, you know, and they say, look, there are alternatives to the idea of equal human rights, of general human rights, of democracy, elections. And one of the reasons is that democracy does not deliver. This is the way in which people are convinced that it is not worthwhile to do the work that you are doing now, you know. And so your job is difficult, but is worthwhile, not because of principle, but because not only principle, there are also principles, but because it's the only way of, let's say, giving new hope to people, and in Africa is of utmost important. And you know, your meeting that is prior to the European Union, African Union great meeting of tomorrow and the day after tomorrow is absolutely important because elections are the necessary start of a process. And if there are not fair elections, there is no democratic process. But as I hinted before, is not enough. The problem is to be linked to the daily life of the democracy of the African countries and help them monitoring, suggesting, helping the daily working of the countries. And we need also another step, let's say, to build some daily contacts between European institutions and African institutions. You know, many times, in my experience, with the end of elections, it was like the job was done. Look, the problem is to monitor any step of this process and to create institutions. Of course, I am out of politics since some century, but I remember when I was president of the European Commission that I insisted to create a common joint university between African countries and African Union, European Union, African countries, European countries, with the equal number of students, equal number of professors, some sort of to create a new community. And this was simply condemned as a money wasted. This was the definition. This is money wasted. Now I am happy to say that the idea of working together in order to implement democratic step is going on, you know. So this was only a personal example of the necessity of following up your fantastic job in consolidation and supporting the elections project. And it's worthwhile that this will be brought in front of the meeting of tomorrow and day after tomorrow in order to have a full program for democratic support. So I'm really ending this sermon. It's too long. Ending this sermon, I thank to the group of elections, to Santana, to the European Center for Electoral Support for this initiative. And I think and I hope that you will bring strongly your result to the summit of tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, because we need a new link between Europe and Africa. Everybody is telling that China is conquering Africa, Turkey is conquering Africa, but still the great support is of the European Union. Only our disunity gives a wrong message. But we have to think together, as you are doing today, how to be together and together with the African Union countries to help the democratic progress of the continent. Thank you so much, and have a nice day. Have a fruitful work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for those important remarks and also for your enduring effort in supporting democracy around the world. Our next speaker, as we said in our introductory remarks, is Her Excellency Marina Sereni. And as you heard, this seminar is sponsored with support of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We'll speak about it. But may it behoves me also to extend not only a warm welcome to her, but also to thank the Italian government for this great support that has also enabled us to look at this important subject. Your Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, participants, and friends, I am particularly pleased to take part in this event. I am proud to say that it may be well considered a natural consequence of the long-lasting Italian commitment to the issue of promoting electoral rights in Africa. That is why we hope that it will spark a fruitful debate on an issue that lays at the core of the Italian political strategy towards Africa. The safeguard of democratic institutions through initiatives deemed to strengthen social peace, stability, and security are strongly intertwined. We highlighted the causal link in our strategic policy document, A Partnership with Africa, launched at the end of 2020, stressing the fact that human rights violations, fragile institutions, bad governance, and the disrespect of rule of law trigger political instability, violent extremism, criminality, the proliferation of illicit trafficking, and irregular migration flows. For this reason, the enhancement of good governance has become a core priority for Italy in recent years. This priority is in line with the ambitious African Union Agenda 2063, notably with aspiration number 3, which pursues the realization of an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Furthermore, the constant and major attention given to all these cornerstones of democracy marks a distinctive feature of the Italian and European approach vis-à-vis the other international actors, with well-established strategic interests in Africa and unclear political and economic agendas. Our African partners are well aware of that, and in my view, their long-lasting appreciation for our initiatives confirms that we are moving in the right direction. In the broader sector of democratic consolidation, electoral support plays a pivotal role. The electoral question per se often represents a critical turning point in the relations between institutions and citizens. On the one hand, credible elections help strengthening the accountability of democratic institutions. On the other hand, electoral mismanagement leads to social discontent and to feelings of disaffection towards the authorities, as recent developments in several areas of the African continent demonstrate. In this framework, Italy has purposely decided to support the exchange of best practices as well as the implementation of capacity building and training programs in the electoral field, to the benefit of civilians, personnel, and professionals in several African countries, to the extent that they shall involve a genuine and concrete African ownership. Consequently, the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation has co-sponsored the Innova Election project mentioned before, which was presented on the occasion of the launch of a Partnership for Africa in December 2020. The initiative is organized and implemented by ECAS Foundation in partnership with the United Nations Institute for Training and Research and the Italian Academic Excellence of Scuola Sant'Anna di Pisa. It aims at bolstering African capacities of election management, observation and assistance, indeed the same bright pathway that ECAS has undergone recently through the agreement stipulated with the African Union to strengthen electoral abilities in the African continent. As for Innova Election, which has showed brilliant results, as for instance, the training of hundreds of participants from 35 African countries and the involvement of several African regional organizations, we wish the incoming project a genuine and extraordinary success by engaging even a wider number of people while always keeping in mind a full inclusion of women and youths. Against the background of everything we have been saying, there is an incontrovertible truth. The outbreak of COVID pandemic has put the respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms under serious strain. In order to prevent democracy from slowing down and showing further deteriorating trends, let us all cooperate to defend our most precious common good. Fostering electoral integrity and accountability, as well as the conduct of peaceful, genuine, and credible elections worldwide, is the rightest step towards that direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellency Sereni, for an important statement outlining the scope and objective of Italian support to democracy in general and elections in particular. May I now call upon Her Excellency Emanuela Derali. As I said earlier on, she's EU Special Representative of the Sahel. And as you all know, that the Sahel is now the epicenter of conflict, having moved more or less from the Middle East. But it's also a place that is manifesting violent extremists. And also we are seeing unconstitutional change of governments because citizens, as was pointed out by President Prodi, are disillusioned. And one cannot underrate the heavy responsibility that is lying on the shoulders of Her Excellency Emanuela. Please speak to us.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Chair Rastus. I'm very happy to be here, also because I find myself among friends, and especially President Romano Prodi, Vice Minister Marina Sereni, and all the other distinguished speakers that are here today. And I'm particularly happy because we are talking about a topic that for me is particularly significant. Also because I've been electoral observer in more than 20 missions in my life, most of them in Africa and Northern Europe, Eastern Europe. And therefore, I have, let's say, a perception of elections as something that is not only the end of a process, a political process, but it actually conserves and peaks and keeps its transformative power. Certainly, in this moment in which I am actually a special representative for the Sahel, I realize how difficult it is to keep the political meaning of elections because there is a lot of disillusionment with politics, there is still a fear of corruption, the very important principle that also President Mandela supported so much, such as every vote counts, is perceived as something utopistic, which is something that I find particularly worrying, because if the populations lose their faith in the electoral process, of course, we risk that the political process becomes somehow idle, or can bring some solutions that are more in the direction of extremism than in the democratic direction. Of course, what I can say is that despite all these real risks in the actual political panorama nowadays, also in the Sahel, and I will say a couple of words about this in a minute, I continue to think that elections have a very important transformative power, and I also want to say that the European Union believes strongly in this, of course, and Italy within the European Union is particularly engaged in supporting this principle. And as regards the Sahel, which is a very complex area at the moment, going through a very serious crisis, I have to say that the electoral process is part of the more general concept of governance, which is the key political point in the new strategy of the European Union for the Sahel. So we are all perfectly aware of the fact that unless we do this, we will not have proper governance, and unless we don't have governance, that means also welfare state, we are not going to solve any problem, because even the problems of security are very much related to the issue of governance. And therefore, of course, we have to put all the efforts we can in favoring electoral processes, and especially guaranteeing that the populations have the opportunity to express themselves. In this sense, I want to say that we ask ourselves whether the elections actually empower citizens. In order to do so, certainly we have to concentrate very much on the electoral process. This, I have to say, I am also advocating for as regards Mali, for instance, because in Mali, you know that we are going through a very serious crisis. The transition has not virtually started, unlike other countries like, for instance, Chad, and therefore we are insisting on the need to have a proper time frame for transition. We are insisting to make sure that the actual government shows the will to start the proper political process to reestablish democracy through elections. Certainly, I can say that in this sense, because the crisis is so strong, I am insisting on the fact that also the electoral process is fundamental. And therefore, I think that if we concentrate on the electoral process, favoring voting educations, for instance, and other parts of the electoral process that are absolutely fundamental for the empowerment of the population, we cannot really achieve anything, because we need to sensitize the population in a way by which there is a general understanding of the importance of also pushing for this kind of electoral process. I want to just say that, and this in this sense, in elections is a very striking, important project that I support completely. Also, I supported it when I was still Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs together with Marina Sereni in Italy, and I am very convinced that this is an important, very important tool. Just to conclude, I would like to say that regarding the European Union and its role, and of course Italy within the European Union, I remember, for instance, the first elections in which the European Union was a protagonist in setting up an electoral mission. I was there. It was 1994 in South Africa, the first multi-ethnic elections, as well as in other places. I, for instance, want to say that the elections have a huge social importance. I remember, for instance, observing elections in Ukraine in 1998, and we are talking about Ukraine nowadays. And just to, if you allow, sharing one of my personal experiences, I was so impressed by the fact, because I am an Italian, I've voted all my life, and for me it's a normal part of my life as a citizen, and this is another big concept on which we should reflect. But when I started observing elections in a remote area in Ukraine, I noticed that because for them was such an event, such a demonstration of the ability of being a proper citizen in a democratic context, they had decorated the polling station with flowers, with vases, with plants, with all sorts of beautiful things to celebrate the act of voting, which is something that we should also ritually remember, that is part, an important part, and especially an extraordinary part of our citizenship. So regarding Sahel, of course, I am insisting on this. I'm saying, yes, look at the elections. The elections are part of the negotiation at the moment. It's very difficult, as you know, for a number of reasons I cannot explain now, but certainly it's part of the problem of the crisis in Mali in particular. But look also at the electoral process. Concentrate on the electoral process. Start thinking of educating citizens to voting, for instance, which would allow us also to penetrate the communities, to meet the people, to start building a democratic discourse. And therefore, again, I'm very happy to be here because a project like Innov Elections certainly goes in this direction, and we need more Innov Elections in the region of Sahel as well as everywhere else. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emanuela, for that important statement. We certainly share your sentiments, and as you exude with that passion of how you see elections being very transformative, but also a vehicle through which you can re-establish democracy. And of course, stressing the importance of time and making sure the electoral process is given its proper place. Our next speaker, and I really contextualize it in thanking the European Union Commission, because if there is an institution that has done much in the area of support in conflicts, but also in transition to democracy, is the European Union. And today we have, as I stated earlier on, Christina Kokakokinakis, Director for Values and Multilateral Relational, also Deputy Managing Director of Managing Directorate Global. Madam. Christina.
Thank you very much, President, Excellencies, good morning, dear colleagues. First of all, anzi di tutto vorrei ringraziare il Ministero degli Esteri per questa invitazione, and I will switch now to English for everybody's. But coming from the Austrian Diplomatic Service, we are supposed to speak a couple of words in Italian as well. Very good. And with that, I'll concentrate in my speech on the on the elections as such, including electoral assistance, and then I will be complemented on that by my colleague from the Commission, from INTBA. On election observation, I will then close with 4 remarks at the end. Well, basically what we have heard from the preceding speakers is that there is a backsliding in democracy. I'd like to mention a number, which is 75% of today's world's population live in autocracies or in countries that are facing democratic deterioration. This is a number I think we should be aware of, and we should work with that. Second, it is of course no longer clear that we can take democracy for granted. This is a fact, and this trend has both affected not only Africa, but of course also Europe, the European continent. In Europe, we observe the need to renew democracy and of course re-energize citizen supports, and we are also currently experiencing cases of democratic stagnation. And in Africa, the number of authoritarian regimes are now outnumbering the number of democracies. So this is where we are. 2 points on elections. much has been said already, but two main messages. The organization of credible, but also of inclusive and peaceful elections continue to constitute a core element of democracy worldwide, including, by the way, the return to a democratic constitutional order. Although slightly decreasing, the Afrobarometer confirms that most of the Africans want to choose their leaders through the ballot box. And this, I think, warrants our attention. It is not only that people do want to elect, to participate in elections, but they want also credible and meaningful elections. And they also want a functioning institutions to translate the will of the citizens. Second, the European Union has, of course, provided since many, many years support to promote the organization of credible electoral processes worldwide and also, of course, on the African continent, various forms and shapes, including technical assistance. Example, electoral management bodies or other institutions, civil society organizations, media journalists. This is with these stakeholders we are working with. And I'm looking forward to Chiara, who will speak a bit more than from the Commission's perspective on EU electoral and democracy assistance. Second, on election observations. I'd like to raise particular attention to the work that both the European Union but also the African Union are carrying out in relation to election observations. And this is something which we have in common. This is something, this is a point we share, a point of concern we share, but also a point where we want to take action and work together. Both our missions have the potential of being complementary. It is a lot about using synergies and avoiding duplications as always, and a lot about the so-called integrated approach. The EU missions are often in a position to be more openly, maybe in expressing criticism, entre guillemets now, linked to the implementation of the electoral process. And on the other hand, the African Union is often well placed to facilitate political negotiations. And this is really your advantage, your comparative advantage. This has worked well, particularly in Zambia, just to mention an example, in the August election, Zambia of last year, of August 2021. Of course, we will continue to work extensively as EU with the African Union to exchange, but also to improve our methodologies. And here I would like to refer to the ICTs, which become more and more relevant also in the field of elections. And of course, a stronger influence of social media. Challenges such as disinformation are just one of those I would like to mention. And let me be clear here, we heard your request from the African Union to get more into this digital world. And we are well aware of this plea for the EU to help you on this way. Another area where I think we should concentrate a bit more between EU and AU in order to promote added value is related, of course, to the follow-up of an election observation mission and a follow-up on the election observation recommendations. In other words, we need to find ways to strategically coordinate amongst ourselves, but also to more actively encourage state parties to implement these observation recommendations, because there is nothing nothing worse, let's say, than if you have recommendations which, in the end of the day, are not implemented. To wrap up, I promised 4 messages which I would like to share with you. First, conflicts are overtaking the agenda, both in Europe. For us, we see this in the External Action Service every day, as well as in Africa. And the EU-AU summit will focus on exactly peace, but also on these security aspects. However, we see that long-term development, prosperity, stability, etc., require that peace and security on the one hand, but also that good governance, democracy, human rights on the other hand, are being promoted simultaneously. My second message would be that in view of the severe current challenges to democracy, in both continents, by the way, we both need to be alert to current developments. working together through exchanging information, again, through the integrated approach, fostering cooperation, but also to identify where we can join activities will be crucial. My third point, and this is a very relevant for me, is in order to foster democracy around the world, in order to be able to monitor abuse of power, but also in order to be holding governments responsible for crimes against human rights, also for upholding the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which next year will have its 75th anniversary, and the Vienna Declaration Program of Action's 30th anniversary. Civil society engagement is key. We haven't talked too much about civil society as of now, but this is really key for all of us. And colleagues, excellencies, to finish, human rights is not a dividing line between left and right. It's just a dividing line between right and wrong. And human rights, and there you can be sure, for the European Union, they are universal, and not just for us, for everybody, and they are indivisible. And what do I mean by that? Indivisible means that we will continue to push, to promote, to defend civil and political rights, but we will also engage with you and continue to engage and strengthen our cooperation on economic, social, and cultural rights. These two covenants go together. There can't be civil and political without ESC. Can't be ESC rights without civil and political rights. They are indivisible and they are universal. They apply to everyone, everywhere, and they do not belong to anybody. Not to a single government, not to the EU, not to the EU. They belong to the people. And with that closing remark, this is not a romantic notion, or this is not an old-fashioned notion to push for universality. This is hardcore foreign policy for the European Union. Thank you.
I apologize. I have to go for a meeting with the minister.
Thank you so much.
I'm coming back.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Christina Koknakis. You've delivered a very important statement that I don't need to touch upon, given us very important statistics, very alarming, but also drawn the red line where you have indicated that the human rights are not negotiable. These are inalienable rights. And we look forward to partnering with you in advancing this important cause that you have clearly underscored. Our next speaker is Mrs. Chiara Adamo, Director of Human Development, Migration, Governance, and Peace International Partnership, European Commission. One of the effects of conflicts, of course, is manifested by displaced societies, which leads not only to internally displaced persons, but also migration. And I'm sure you have a lot to say, and this is also a subject of discourse around elections and Africa's stability. And so welcome, Madam Chair.
Grazie, seguirò l'esempio della collega dell'IES non perché sia una diplomatica ma perché sono italiana, per ringraziare gli organizzatori, il Ministero di Affari Esteri e Cooperazione Internazionale, ECHES e l'Istituto della Scuola di Sant'Anna di Pisa. E ripasso all'inglese. So the European Commission is truly committed, of course, to continue to work and intensify its cooperation with the African Union Commission and with our African partners, as well as with civil society to support democracy. Indeed, this goes beyond electoral assistance, but electoral assistance is an important part of it. This reflects very, very concretely if you look at our commitments in the Global Europe Instrument, which is our new instrument for the 7 years to come, at the national level with 42 programs, country programs, really including as a focus area of intervention democratic governance. At the regional level, where we intend to work closely to support the African governance architecture and really partner with the Division for Political Affairs of the AUC. And at the global level, President van der Leyen just last 10 December announced a big ambitious thematic program on human rights and democracy for 1.5 billion euros. This was announced at the summit of democracy convened by President Biden. This instrument is meant to really allow us to continue support electoral observation, but also really promoting electoral assistance and inclusive and participatory democratic processes. One way we are also exploring to step our efforts and join forces, because as it was said, it is important to really work at scale and in a coordinated manner on the ground. One way that we are finding to do that is by launching a Team Europe Democracy Initiative, which Commissioner Urpilainen just launched actually last December, which gathers for the moment 14 EU member states. So of course I also mention it here today because I very much look forward also for a conversation with Italy to see whether there is any interest in joining this coalition. As my colleague was mentioning, indeed the EIU Democracy Index 2021 just was out last week. I also had a look, and indeed the number of people living in a democracy fell to less than 50%. There is a real sharp year-on-year decline in the average globe score, and this score was only matched back in 2010 following the global financial crisis. So there is really a worrying trend. The worrying trend is global. Of course, Africa also has not escaped to it. And as was mentioned by Ms. Daré, the state of democracy, rule of law in Africa is also facing challenges in the recent years and months with a number of recent military takeovers. There are, of course, also reasons for hope. Just a few examples, Kenya, Malawi, but also Zambia, 2021, with political alternations through elections, and vibrant youth and women and civil society organizations mobilized for democracy and against corruption in a number of countries. I can only mention Sudan or Eswatini, Uganda, or South Africa, you name it. The Afrobarometer was also mentioned, and it is interesting because it shows a lot of variations in the perception of democracy by citizens. One thing is clear, 82% of African citizens reject one-man rule, 77% reject one-party rule, and 75% reject military rule. So at the same time, we see that the young people voter turnout is declining. And support to elections, although remains important, declines from 83 to 75%. And while the demand for accountability, rule of law, and checks and balances is really going up. How can we read this? I think Professor Prodi had told us at the beginning of this conference. In short, there is a strong demand for democracy. The demand for democracy is resilient, but citizens are increasingly disappointed in terms of the supply. And in order to reverse this trend, it is ever more important really to show the value of democracy, to show the link between democracy and long-term stability and prosperity, and also the possibility for credible and transparent elections, really as the cornerstone of democratic processes. So what to do? A few lines from my side to complement the colleague. Of course, strengthening the partnership with the African Union Commission and support the African governance architecture, show the values of democracy by supporting inclusive, transparent approaches, good governance, and also delivering in terms of redistribution of health, of curbing inequalities, and bring really stability and growth, and support to national independent institutions, oversight bodies, civil society, youth and women have been mentioned, and last but not least, promote the integrity of elections throughout the cycle, so really focus on the electoral process, as was so eloquently said. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you very much, Madam Chiara. You have really linked the economic crisis to challenges that countries face in sustaining democracy, bringing the trend that emerged from the financial crisis. And as it was said by Fabio at the opening statement, this meeting is also contextualized against the backdrop of what has happened, the pandemic and the rest. And so we can see that link, and it raises very important questions. But you have also gone to talk about the need for credible and well-organized elections, sustaining the values that we all cherish. Let me now call upon my brother and friend, Mr. Kaleste Mbali, former colleague in the Commission. He's still in the Commission, who is acting director in the Department of Political Affairs, Peace and Security. As you know, that is the backbone of Africa in the area of governance, democracy, and elections. And so he's seen it all. But he will be speaking at this session, really bringing the message from the Commission on behalf of Commissioner Bankole, who's here actually, but is attending. Even as of yesterday, they were still drafting. Those of you know, when you attend this meeting, what happens? They are drafting the outcome statements before leaders arrive tomorrow. And so they are still in that negotiations, and perhaps that's why he's not able to join us. Even last night when I was talking to him, he was still busy drafting, in the drafting team. And as you have heard, this is a meeting that is also organized around the issue of peace and security. And so, my brother Mbali, if you could take the floor.
Merci beaucoup. Excellence, c'est toujours un plaisir de s'asseoir à un podium avec vous. Je m'allie donc au protocole qui a été énuméré tout à l'heure depuis son Excellence Romano Prodi, ancien Premier ministre d'Italie, également ancien président de la Commission de l'Union européenne, ainsi que tous les autres panélistes. Et je dois dire tout protocole du moins observé, puisque je vois dans la salle d'imminentes personnalités, des délégations, et je voudrais les saluer tous. Je voudrais, avant tout propos, vous transmettre au nom de l'ambassadeur Bankole Adeoye, commissaire aux affaires politiques, paix et sécurité, les salutations de la Commission de l'Union africaine et de son président, son Excellence Moussa Faki Mahamat, qui, comme l'a dit le président Mouécha, sont tous occupés à travailler pour la réussite du partenariat Union africaine-Union européenne qui se tient en ce moment même à Bruxelles. Je voudrais, avec votre permission également, saluer Fabio et sa dynamique équipe de EKES pour nous avoir associés à cette réflexion, à cet événement, également et surtout pour l'excellente collaboration que nous avons eue avec EKES et avec l'Union européenne de façon générale, ainsi que pour les nouvelles initiatives qui vont être lancées bientôt, puisque nous sommes dans la phase, n'est-ce pas, de lancement des nouveaux programmes. Mesdames et messieurs, le thème proposé à notre réflexion du jour, à savoir renforcer les capacités des acteurs électoraux en Afrique, dans le cadre du partenariat Union africaine-Union européenne, retient particulièrement notre attention en tant qu'Union africaine, mais également en tant qu'Africains. Comme vous le savez déjà, et je souhaite de le réitérer ici, le département des affaires politiques, paix et sécurité de la Commission de l'Union africaine a également pour mandat la promotion de la bonne gouvernance, la gouvernance démocratique et participative en Afrique et le renforcement des institutions électorales, ce qui implique un soutien aux organes de gestion des élections ainsi qu'à toutes les plateformes de partage d'expériences et de réflexion sur les politiques et les processus électoraux sur le continent. En tant qu'acteur incontournable de la construction et de la consolidation de la démocratie sur le continent, les organes de gestion des élections contribuent directement à la réalisation de l'agenda 2063 de l'Union africaine qui vise à œuvrer pour une Afrique intégrée, prospère et en paix, conduite par ses propres citoyens et représentant une force dynamique sur la scène internationale. Le partenariat Union africaine-Union européenne est à ce titre essentiel pour le renforcement des initiatives africaines pour la consolidation de la paix et la sécurité à travers des processus électoraux crédibles, transparents et inclusifs. Ce partenariat doit se faire autour des éléments de convergence et de principes qui sont énoncés dans les instruments de l'Union africaine, les instruments internationaux également, mais également les instruments des institutions communautaires africaines à travers les communautés économiques et régionales promouvant la démocratie et la bonne gouvernance. À cet effet, la Charte africaine sur la démocratie, les élections et la gouvernance recommande d'ailleurs aux États de créer et renforcer les organes électoraux indépendants et impartiaux chargés de la gestion des élections, comme première obligation. Deuxièmement, de créer des mécanismes nationaux pour régler dans les meilleurs délais le contentieux électoral. Et ensuite, faire en sorte que les partis et les candidats qui participent aux élections aient un accès équitable aux médias publics, aux médias d'État, pendant les élections. Ce sont des recommandations, mais en réalité, des exigences qui sont faites aux États de pouvoir créer les conditions pour qu'on arrive à des élections crédibles, transparentes, et l'objectif étant de renforcer la paix à travers des élections qui sont déclarées crédibles. Ce partenariat devra donc prendre en compte l'appui à l'établissement de chronogrammes réalistes, objectifs et consensuels, l'appui à la mise en place de cadres légaux, institutionnels, opérationnels, financiers, qui soient des plus crédibles, ainsi que des mécanismes appropriés pour leur mise en œuvre. Le renforcement des capacités des acteurs du processus électoral, etc., etc. Donc, parmi les actions les plus essentielles autour desquelles nous devons, pour les prochains programmes, focaliser nos énergies afin de créer les conditions favorables à des élections crédibles et démocratiques en Afrique. Cette réalité nous invite à une réflexion collective afin de mieux cerner les enjeux et tracer des pistes claires pour le renforcement de notre partenariat, mais également pour nous mettre en adéquation avec la méthodologie et les mécanismes pour leur mise en œuvre. Je ne saurais terminer mon propos sans évoquer les nouveaux défis auxquels nous sommes confrontés aujourd'hui sur le continent africain, à savoir la résurgence des changements anticonstitutionnels du gouvernement. Je ne vais pas élaborer sur cette question puisque mes préopinants sont revenus largement là-dessus pour évoquer, n'est-ce pas, ce défi qui se pose aujourd'hui au continent africain et notamment certaines régions du continent lorsqu'il s'agit, n'est-ce pas, de la promotion du constitutionnalisme, de l'état de droit, autant de valeurs qui participent à la consolidation de la paix et de la sécurité sur le continent. Il s'agit là d'une contingence qui crée des crises politiques qui impose des consultations politiques comme compromis de sortie de crise, qui constitue en fait une brèche à la vie démocratique, à l'état de droit, comme nous l'avions mentionné plus haut. Mais fort heureusement, l'Union africaine et ses communautés économiques et régionales sont en train de porter la réflexion pour trouver des pistes afin de renforcer le système, l'environnement démocratique en Afrique et surtout de mettre fin à cette recrudescence, n'est-ce pas, de changements anticonstitutionnels de gouvernement. Nous aurons d'ailleurs en mi-mars un grand forum qui sera une occasion de lancer la réflexion sur les changements anticonstitutionnels de gouvernement, sur la base des études qui avaient déjà été faites sur ces changements anticonstitutionnels de gouvernement, afin de proposer des réponses appropriées pour que nous puissions mettre fin définitivement à ces situations. Je voudrais peut-être, pour finir, remercier le gouvernement italien pour avoir appuyé ECHES, notre partenaire, sur le plan financier, dans sa mission d'accompagnement des efforts de l'Union africaine et de ses communautés économiques et régionales dans le renforcement de la démocratie à travers les appuis qui sont apportés aux organes chargés des élections. Nous sommes d'avis et nous sommes convaincus que les autres vont suivre, l'Union européenne également, pour que nous puissions tous ensemble, dans le cadre de ce partenariat que nous voulons dynamique, continuer d'apporter l'appui nécessaire à la consolidation de la paix et de la sécurité en Afrique. Et je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Caliste, for your statement, which has outlined the importance of the partnership between the African Union Commission and also ECAS in that partnership. You have also gone ahead to give us the peace and security architecture of the African Union, stressing the role of the organization, the member states, and electoral management bodies, but also underscoring it all with the very important aspect of constitutionalism. We thank you and we look forward also to your cooperation with ECAS, which we so much cherish. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this opening session, and I'm sure you will agree with me that we have had great contributions from this great panel, which was graced by none other than President Prodi and all these important personalities here. And we now have a very good context under which the next panels will take place. With that, may I once again ask you to give an applause to these panelists for their contribution. May I now invite my good friend Pashu to come and preside over the next session, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Are you staying or are you going?
I'm going.
Oh.
But I'm very happy to stay in contact.
Yes, yeah. You exchange cards.
Voilà. Okay, if we can retake the sittings, we would like to start the next panel in order to recuperate a little bit of the time of the opening, where we had great speakers, and of course, we needed to allocate the appropriate time. So now we are going to the next session, the first panel, where we will talk about national inclusive dialogues and elections in democratic transitions, which is an extremely actual issues, and the importance of peace mediations in electoral processes. And then for this matter, we will have the honor again to have Erastus Muencha here, the former deputy chairperson of the African Union, that we have already seen, and the moderation of the opening. We will have also Stefano Manservisi, now chair of the Global Community Engagement and Resilience Funds, but as well, everybody knows, former Director General for now called International Partnership, but before Development Cooperation at the European Commission, and then connected from Strasbourg, we will have Charles Goerens, a member of the European Parliament. Thanks a lot for your patience, because you've been connected since a while. And then here on my left, we have Sonia Reyes Diavanidis. I hope I pronounced it perfectly, not bad, okay, which is the director of the European Peacebuilding Liaison Office, EPLO, of which ECES is member, and is the largest European networks of civil society organizations, and then a foundation dealing with peace building and conflict prevention. And we have also Vittoria Florinder, a senior electoral and mediation expert. So without further ado, I would like... sorry? Sorry? Sorry?
You want me to be at the beginning or later?
I would like you to stay here.
Yeah, I stay, but not right away.
No, no problem, no problem. Sorry, just internal coordination matters. I would like, without further ado, launch the panel by saying that the European Union and the African Union collaboration, we know, is based on the premises that the partnership on peace mediation and electoral support can yield better results than those from the individual efforts. So I would like to ask the panelists, starting with Mr. Goerens, how this collaboration can be further strengthened in view of recent constitutional transition that we have seen, and what are some of the ways in which the existing partnership can actually work preventatively in this regard. So with all the respect for everybody, Mr. Goerens, you have the floor.
Est-ce que vous pourriez répéter votre question, s'il vous plaît?
Je le fais en français. Et donc, la question c'est de lancement du panel, c'est comment la collaboration entre l'Union européenne et l'Union africaine, vu qu'elle est basée sur le fait qu'il y a un partenariat sur la médiation des paix et des élections, peut avoir des résultats plus importants des efforts individuels. Et donc, comment cette collaboration entre l'Union européenne et l'Union africaine peuvent être améliorées ou renforcées en considération des développements inconstitutionnels en Afrique dans la dernière année, et qu'est-ce qu'on pourrait faire, dans votre opinion, dans le contexte de ce partenariat qui est en train d'être revu justement cette semaine avec le sommet qui se tiendra à partir de demain.
Bon, je voudrais dire d'abord que nous sommes très heureux de pouvoir dire qu'au cours des dernières années, nous avons tout fait pour améliorer les possibilités de médiation. J'ai été co-rapporteur moi-même du NDICI Global Europe, où nous avons insisté aussi sur l'amélioration des observations électorales en Afrique. Des résolutions documentent bien entendu la volonté du Parlement et des autres institutions européennes d'aller de l'avant. Nous sommes d'avis que la médiation est importante à tous les cycles, à tous les stades du processus électoral, en vue de prévenir donc les violences et de garantir des élections en toute sérénité. L'appel du Parlement européen, auquel je m'associe bien entendu, va aussi en direction des États membres. C'est à la fois une possibilité pour lancer des partenariats entre l'Union européenne et les États africains, et bien entendu aussi entre les États membres et les États africains. Ils peuvent évidemment s'associer. La médiation est indispensable, nous l'avons souligné à maintes reprises, et ce faisant, je crois qu'on ne le souligne pas assez souvent, l'Europe s'engage dans une coopération qui a très peu de visibilité. Le conflit prévenu n'a aucune visibilité. On ne parle pas non plus des violences électorales évitées, mais c'est quand même grâce à cela que l'Union européenne, ensemble avec l'Union africaine, arrive à faire avancer le processus. Tout cela, bien entendu, est aussi un exemple de partenariat qui nous interpelle tous. Ce partenariat a ses racines dans les documents fondamentaux de l'Union européenne, aussi bien que dans ceux de l'Union africaine. J'ai encore lu ces références. Elles sont multiples et elles font de l'Union africaine et de l'Union européenne, bien entendu, une possibilité de partenariat important. Pour ce qui est de l'avenir immédiat, on sait qu'on a eu par le passé de nombreuses observations électorales. Cette année sont à l'agenda, selon les propositions de M. Borrell, Kenya, Angola, Lesotho, Sao Tomé et Principe, Mali et Tchad. Le Mali, bien entendu, là, nous sommes au courant de la façon dont ça se déroule là-bas, de la réaction de la CEDEAO et du groupe T5 à ce qui s'est passé là-bas. Néanmoins, j'espère que aussi avec la possibilité de laisser derrière nous une partie des difficultés causées par le Covid, nous pourrions de nouveau faire partie de ces missions et d'accompagner, le cas échéant, avec les moyens qui sont à la disposition de l'Union européenne, les missions de médiation.
Monsieur Gorenz, c'est bien entendu le message que vous portez de la part du Parlement européen. C'est très important ce que vous êtes en train d'évoquer. Et donc, dans ce contexte, j'aimerais bien demander à Mr. Stefano Manservisi d'amener en anglais ou en français sa propre contribution sur les sujets que vous venez d'évoquer. Merci.
Thank you very much, Fabio, and thank you to everybody for being here. Very pleased to be with you. I think that now in the previous discussion, all the general political framework has been set up in particular around 3 elements. One, democracy. Democracy is, let's say, very often intended in different ways. So same figures, as Chiara Adamo said, calling for more democracy, but also showing, let's say, disappointment. And therefore, first point is this is around democracy, which is not defined, right? Maybe in an equal way, is defined very often by output expectations in any case. Or in any case, this is the first block to which we have to make reference. I mean, the second one is the block of the elections, as the way in which democracy is translated into institutions which are taking legitimate decisions. Also here, we have a mixed picture, because clearly elections are very often or often perceived as a formal process which are not delivering, and or if they are delivering, are not delivering in the general interest. Or in any case, there is a question mark on the elections as such. But this is the second block on which we are all committed in order to strengthen, to bring forward, to defend, maybe to also decline democracy in a more effective way. And then we arrive to the preparation of the elections, which is the core business, by the way, of ECES, and which is intimately linked to how we arrive eventually to elections which are substantially perceived and formally being credible in order to deliver democracy, which delivers institutions which are taking the decision, which are fulfilling the expectation of people. Therefore, my third block is that the electoral preparation is a crucial moment. It's a crucial moment because it is not only about the logistic of the elections, but it is about the cohesion around the elections. It's about the concept of legitimacy. It's about the concept of that everybody should understand or should be in a position to understand that these elections, this process is in the general interest. It's not a dividing one, but it is an inclusive one. And here, the role of civil society and the action at the level of civil society is fundamental. Why? Because this is the ground in which violent extremism can spring. And it's precisely where all those elements, by the way, overemphasized even more in the last period by the pandemic, which has even exasperated and exacerbated even more inequalities, different taxes, discriminations, etc., and all the perceptions which are going with that, are obviously created even more discontent, even more frustration, even more elements for radicalization. This is declined in different ways. In the Sahel, you see, in Eastern Africa, you see, in Southern Africa, in other parts of the world. We are concentrating in Africa, but in reality, this phenomenon is shared worldwide, by the way, as it has been said, including also in the same European Union. So therefore, this moment in which the preparation of the election is addressing the social cohesion and the sentiment of belonging, the sense of purpose, is crucial. And it is in this segment where we can call it mediation, we can call it, let's say, resilience building, where, I mean, a crucial, let's say, a crucial section which can lead or not to a democracy, or can lead or not to a certain form of democracy, is fundamental. From this point of view, I think, for the position I have today with chairing this Global Community Resilience and Engagement Fund, which is an international foundation which is financing activities to prevent violent extremism and radicalization, I've seen from closer the importance to work at micro level, at grassroots level, to really listen to people and to empower people. Why? Because it is in this moment that from discontent and radicalization or polarization can spring, and very often spring in reality, violence. Violence which is generated from inside, genuinely, but violence which much more often are in reality created in order to influence then the election, to deprive them of credibility, to create mistrust in the process, to intimidate voters, to, let's say, deprive of all these elements of inclusiveness which are essential for whatever kind of, let's say, electoral process and living together. Hate speeches, misinformation, by the way, Emanuele Derre said that very clearly, that is playing a big role in the Sahel, all this, the fake information, or not information, I say, the ethnic manipulation, again, just think about Sahel, the playing one community against the other, instead of working for the general interest, to present the process as a partial one, not an inclusive one. Just the winner takes it all, and therefore there is a reason to oppose or to play a similar game. From all this ground, from my point of view, we have seen not only phenomenal violence inside, but it is the perfect ground for terrorism. And this is the reason why, in the experience of this Global Community Engagement and Resilience Fund, it is important to link all these elements and to empower civil society in order to build resilience from inside. There is no resilience which can be brought from outside on this. The assistance is more to train the local actors to find the reasons of belonging to a society which is working in order to produce democracy or more democracy and better governance. This is the point. And the crucial role of civil society on this is fundamental. If we miss the work with civil society, the good governance agenda and the institutional building will have very weak ground. Therefore, I think that this is a specific, let's say, lessons that we have to look, and I think that also for personal experience in other positions that there is a flood of funds, of course, which are going, for example, to Sahel and to crisis. You know, there are at present $3 trillion which is spent in security matters, which are also a huge amount which are spent in order to institutional building, yes, but still too little invested at the ground level, not to do on behalf of the civil society, but to empower more the local civil society. And listening and understanding what are the factors which are unifying, which very often, as we have seen in Dori, in Burkina Faso, or in other parts of Africa, you know, are linked to factors that only locally can speak to people. An imam, which is well positioned, a local, authority, which is credible, a doctor, which has supplied effective healthcare. You know, there is a sort of, let's say, a constellation of reality which we must, or we should be, in a better position to support. I think that otherwise, not only terrorism is already there, you know, but if it not today terrorism, look at, for example, what is happening since years now in Cabo Delgado, in Mozambique, you know, there is always a reason in order to radicalize people and then to take, a flag. Could be the religion, could be an autonomous revendication, could be whatever. But these are disruption factors which must be addressed. And we have a couple of examples that, how we can help on this, but we must be able to go micro level, empowering the local communities, training them, in order to also, let's say, develop critical thinking, but which is inclusive, which is not critical thinking which is deriving to fracture. Critical thinking which is also extremely healthy for the institutions themselves, because institutions are stronger if people are critical, not just if they, are just following what they are doing. I mean, the legitimacy is a complex concept which is composed by several small elements. In Nigeria, for example, in the experience of the GSERF, we set up, a group which is called CART, Community Action Response Teams, which are locally generated, locally, let's say, composed, which are training, which are including traditional and religious leaders. Inter-religion dialogue is fundamental. Maybe we don't call it mediation, but in reality is one of the most powerful, mediation, inter-religion dialogue, inter-ethnic, of course, but very often the ethnic is manipulated, very often. You see in many parts of the Sahel how this is happening, to identify vulnerable people, which for a number of reasons are more sensitive to the call from the terrorist group or from those which are willing to radicalize in order to be much more able to manipulate people. This CART group, for example, very much led by young people, young and women. For example, in the election of the Kogi state in Nigeria, this has been a powerful tool in order not only to have debate form, but also to drive this part of the observation and preparation, which has led also to this group to become a local observatory, later on. But in order to build something which is self-managed by the communities and which is, is facilitating this sort of inclusiveness in which, everybody is finding its own, its own dimension without predefining it. Because, as I said at the beginning, as many said, let's also understand that in this moment in which worldwide democracy is not only under attack, but it is also under attack in the sense of put it in question. Now, let's accept the challenge to discuss about this. Let's not fall into the, let's say, into the trap that universalism equals our definition. And therefore, in order to do it, let's empower local people. Let's allow local people to understand this and then to work. I think this is the point I would like to underline because, in short, in my experience also, this is probably one of the most visible moments in which the formula of the nexus between security, development, and institutional building takes its own meaning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Manservisi. Actually, you raise extremely important and crucial questions when it comes especially to the role of civil society, organization of civil society at large when it comes not only to dialogue, but to deal with mistrust on institutions, electoral institutions in this case, hate speech you have underlined, and as well the recent event in different countries that led to erosion of the legitimacy of institutions and eventually also to case of terrorism. So in this context, I think it is the moment now to have Sonia to illustrate what is the opinion when it comes to civil society and what an organization like EPLO that represents such broad network of organizations dealing with the peace building and then conflict management has to contribute to this discussion. So when it comes to the role of civil society and how you see what could be done when it comes to the partnership between European Union and the African Union in this matter. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind introduction, but also the opportunity to sit here with all of you. I took so many notes from this morning, and I found it hugely engaging. I think also this presents an opportunity, us sitting together and ECAS being a member of a classically known peace-building organization, to demonstrate the need to break down silos and to look at, I think we've seen the advent and the investment and the improvement of early warning systems, but before that, we always knew that there were points of inflection around elections. And I think we've all been working in this arena, but what we need to look at also is very much the before, the middle, and the after, and that came out quite pronounced this morning. I just want to carry a few reflections of what I took away from some of the other panels without summarizing them, but it was very clear on the decline of democracy, about the need for inclusive civil societies. So I'd like to speak a little bit more about that. The need to show and not tell the value of democracy. On extremist groups, I think there's quite a lot of understanding. The more we sit with civil society, people will tell you we know why our brothers and sisters are joining these groups, and they need to be presented with a clear alternative. We know what some of the approaches to those are in the short term, but in the long term, we need to look at that investment a little bit more carefully. And then, of course, also taking away from this morning, the timing of election support being critical. And so a lot of times when peace-building organizations intervene, it's very much in the preliminary stages up to elections, and we've seen opportunities that have been presented where that's really worked if the engagement has been serious. So in bringing together civil society from across the Sahel, for example, the Horn of Africa, one key theme always emerges in these meetings, and we ask what should be prioritized when supporting governance and democracy and democratic transitions, and they say inclusivity. And so we've got pretty good language around women, around young people, and noting in the Year of the Youth, if you look at global demographics, and not just Africa, that young people under the age of 25 are the majority. And so it's hugely important that we look at ways, and innovative ways, to include them. And how do you include them? Social media and disinformation has become a massive problem. It's also an opportunity. And if we want to look to innovation, we need to include their ideas and their thoughts, because this is the group of people who will be here to solve the problems moving forward. By inclusivity, we mean the whole of society. So I have a list that's like half of the page on my note about what that means. I think the question isn't sort of checking the box to say, okay, marginalized communities, women, young people, different languages. But I think if you put ourselves in the head of who are we not including, what does our society look like, we're going to have a much better idea over the long term. When we also look at the statistics of conflict, we no longer have a beautiful bell curve of conflict, we have a heart monitor. And I think the duration, the severity, the kinds of conflicts that we're seeing require us to be able to take an approach where we break down silos, where we look at the inclusion of really meaningful whole societies, and we focus to some extent on the need to respond quickly, but we tame our patience to be able to commit to long-term solutions if we really want to look at transitioning and cycling countries out of conflict. There's been quite a lot of good civil society work that's been done to strengthen democratic elections and civic education, and more needs to be done, and it can be done to engage with young people, and particularly, women and youth-led CSOs. They have different kinds of access. And so when it comes to, building trust with local authorities, we need to look at those partnerships in a more sort of substantial way. And when I say that, it's not just short-term stabilization and the long-term engagement and the whole of society, this is about, I think Mr. Manservisi mentioned it just a minute ago, about purpose and about belonging, but it's also about hope. And there's also an element that people want to feel if they go to the ballot, that vote makes a difference and they're going to be able to have themselves a different future, that they will have different choices, that they won't necessarily have to move somewhere else to eat. And you can make peace, but you can't make peace with people when they're hungry. So I think that we have sort of parallel conversations about the nexus. When is it do you do peace building? When do you do democracy building? When do you do governance? And we have to have a whole of society, and I think an integrated approach on the ground in a different way. In terms of recommendations, ensuring sort of the engagement, and I think we need to really unpack what that word means that we don't have time to do today. What does it mean to engage with the whole of civil society meaningfully? There's other things that we can do as well. And in terms of the partnership, there's between the European Union and Africa, I think there's other and innovative ways in which we can move forward. I was just thinking about DG INTPA, for example, has developed a youth sounding board mechanism. And how can this or related tools be used to leverage more youth inclusion in election processes? Are there, new and different ways in which we can have dedicated staff members on youth engagement, on electoral monitoring? How can we provide and strengthen the role of CSOs? This is not just financial. I mean, we also need to look to the European Union for their political role in this as well, to make a space for African civil society in this partnership, and make a space also for European, but recognizing the power imbalances there. I think plenty of other recommendations that came out of two statements that APLO has done, one on the European-African Union partnership, and then in the context of the upcoming Youth Action Plan, we brought together young people to feed into that, and both of those reports and statements are on our website, so I won't go into too much detail, but I think in concluding, it's civil society is fine. We have to look at what that constitutes and who is in there, and we have to recognize where we have strengths and where we have no access, and make room and the partnerships and the support and the political and financial support to bring those other organizations that have access beyond ours, because it's only when everybody, including those that are part of the problem, become part of the solution that we're going to start to see change, and when we can also recognize that this kind of change takes long-term commitment. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonia. Certainly change takes quite a lot of time, and then indeed European Union and the African Union are collaborating since a long time, sometimes with very good results, sometimes with challenges to be addressed. Certainly this year we have seen cases in different countries where despite the partnership, despite the civil society engagement, we saw some anti-constitutional changes. And then I would like to ask the contribution of Vittoria on what actually could be the role of mediation or peace mediation in electoral processes, knowing that these transitions seem to expand quite exponentially, and therefore elections at present in the different countries where we're working as well are not exactly set in stone when it comes to the date. Vittoria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be part of this panel, and just as Sonia, I think there has been many wise words and experiences already shared. it's also a very timely topic that, of course, takes place amidst other global challenges, and not only COVID-related, but also looking towards the East. What I would like to share as a couple of key reflections is that the unconstitutional transitions that we're seeing, they are somehow also part of what we call illiberal peace, which is basically using the force or the threat of force or cohesion in the name of peace and stability. And it also really underpins our convictions that elections is the best way to make sure that the absolute vast majority of people can be heard in a way that provides for accountability, validity, and reliability. So this is why the unconstitutional changes in themselves, they undermine democracy and, in extension, the role of elections. And having elections as an exit point of undemocratic or unconstitutional transitions is also complex because people are not voting in a state of normality. They're voting in a state of exception and a state of potentially fear. And the countries that are undergoing specifically military transitions, they will be voting in a way that you would probably not normally do. And so to invest in the context and creating the conditions in which elections take place, this is really the role of peace mediation, not when it is already too late. The issue of conflict around elections, it's ever present because elections are, after all, the height of political competition. And so elections will always be marred by conflicts, by tension, but looking at conflict's most visible attribute, which is violence, this is really when we can speak of a very high cost, not only of human life, but it also sets a country back and deters from investments, and it has a very negative correlation with voter engagement and civic engagement. And conflict in itself can lead to voter apathy, which can be very difficult to reverse. So peace mediation certainly has a role to play amidst elections and all around the electoral cycle. And electoral processes should ideally be surrounded by an outer layer of peace mediation efforts and dialogue efforts at all tracks. And this is not to say that donors have to fund 4- or 5-year-long peace mediation projects, but it is to say that raising capacities in peace mediation and dialogue is always timely. And to bridge the fact that there might be very strong sensitivities on the ground that warrants this distance between mediation and electoral actors, at least those commissioned and affiliated, funded, or hired directly by the EU, there is now a methodology that is developed to give both actors on the peace mediation and the electoral side significant and sufficient insight in the other's field, not to miss obvious risks or opportunities for conflict settlement in the electoral process. This methodology, it doesn't suggest that electoral and mediation actors should coordinate in a particular way, or that they should maybe coordinate at all on the ground. There are strong sensitivities around the perception of impartiality, and both peace mediation and electoral support and observation, it comes with its separate mandate. But bringing peace mediation closer to the technical aspects of electoral process, it does two things. First, it allows entry points for mediation to appear clearer. And then it visualizes the risks and limitations of mediation and dialogue, and it provides a realistic guideline for mediation. And here I just want to underline the fact that the electoral calendar is not maybe a calendar that mediation and dialogue practitioners are used to. It looks very different. Mediation processes are fluid, they're voluntary, they're sometimes quite hard, and they're not linear as such. Elections are fairly rigid, and it requires certain activities to take place in a certain time, and they're bound by laws and constitutions and codes. So I'll leave you with 5 points to underscore the value of peace mediation in electoral processes. The first point is that peace mediation has a far greater role to play than just prevent election-related violence. It's about creating the conducive conditions for elections to take place peacefully. Secondly, the development of a robust methodology on how to conduct peace mediation in electoral processes, it appears the best way currently available to us to circumvent that peace mediation and electoral support activities are kept apart on the ground. And thirdly, the literature on peace mediation in electoral processes can sometimes be misleading because it usually focuses on track one, it focuses on highly flawed elections, and so preparing the grounds for peaceful, inclusive elections, this is really something that is understudied, and we don't have sufficient insight or proof how to do this. Fourthly, and this is my second last point, electoral processes are very complex processes. All of us who have sometimes worked with elections and sometimes for all of our lives, we know that we will never become fully fledged experts. So it's not inconceivable to imagine that peace mediators, they struggle with some knowledge gap going into an election and trying to mediate electoral technical issues. And lastly, peace mediation should certainly be directed towards local and municipal elections. These are usually not sufficiently supported, not even domestically, even less so internationally or regionally. But some of the most protected and detrimental conflicts has emerged through local elections. So let's also pull our efforts to support what's happening on the ground locally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vittoria. There are a lot of food for thought, also for hoping that between the European Union and the African Union, there will be spaces of peace mediation on electoral processes, as actually Commissioner Bankole had recently pronounced the importance of mediation in electoral processes, given what happened, especially in the last years in several African countries. Dans ce contexte, M. Gorin, comme vous avez entendu tous les différents intervenants, avant de passer la parole à M. Erastus Muencha, je voulais savoir, vu qu'on a entendu les différentes opinions, des différentes perspectives, si on veut, de M. Manservisi, Sonia et Vittoria sur le rôle de la société civile dans la construction du consensus de la médiation électorale. Je voulais savoir si vous aurez l'amabilité de faire une autre intervention partagée avec nous, vu votre expérience aussi dans le groupe de développement.
Alors, écoutez, encore une fois de plus, la communication est exécrable, mais je crois avoir vous avoir compris, de m'avoir demandé de commenter un peu ce qui a été dit par les autres panélistes. Alors, j'ai deux sentiments. Premièrement, je suis admiratif devant ce qui a été dit, devant le talent développé par les divers intervenants en ce qui concerne la médiation, les solutions apportées dans des sociétés où tout reste à construire, l'analyse très pertinente faite par tous les panélistes, ça, c'est impressionnant. Et je crois que l'Union européenne est là pour soutenir toutes ces opérations, toutes ces tentatives d'arriver à créer des démocraties vivantes en Afrique. Deuxièmement, j'ai un profond sentiment d'humilité quand je vois que nous avons des solutions à proposer aux pays africains. Mon sentiment de profonde humilité réside dans le fait que nous, dans l'Occident, et l'Union européenne fait partie de l'Occident, nous n'arrivons pas non plus à résoudre tous les problèmes qui se posent dans nos démocraties.
Il y a un problème technique. Continuez, M. Gorenz.
Merci. Je disais que j'ai un profond sentiment d'humilité parce que les solutions que nous préconisons pour l'Afrique, pour atténuer les tensions, pour arriver à médier, à concilier ou à réconcilier des camps opposés, c'est très bien. Nous n'avons, de ce point de vue, pas de leçon à donner, parce que nous, non plus, nous n'arrivons pas à bout de tous les problèmes. Quand je prends les États-Unis, la Hongrie, la Pologne, la Russie, la Turquie, par exemple, elles ont en commun que tous ces pays ont eu des élections. Très bien. Ces élections se réduisent très souvent à une opération arithmétique, manipulée au préalable, et on voit à quel point il est difficile, notamment aux États-Unis, d'en arriver à bout avec une médiation. Les camps sont tellement envenimés, opposés, qu'on n'arrive plus à redresser la barre. La situation est figée aussi en Hongrie, en Pologne, nous le voyons, en Russie. On fait taire les opposants. Donc, là non plus, nous n'avons pas les conditions réunies pour en arriver à bout. Alors, je crois que nous devons partager nos expériences et voir dans quelle mesure nous avons aussi des menaces communes. Je pense aux algorithmes qui faussent les élections. Là, je crois que l'Union européenne peut apporter un bout de solution. Avec le Digital Single Act, nous responsabilisons les plateformes médiatiques. Nous exigeons d'elles qu'elles prennent les devants et qu'elles s'équipent du personnel suffisant pour éviter ou prévenir des sortes de manipulations. Nous avons maintes fois au cours des dernières années fait cette expérience. Donc, je crois qu'on devrait aussi ouvrir un chantier pour étudier les menaces communes. Ça va peut-être un peu au-delà du scope de cette table ronde, mais je crois que c'est essentiel dès lors que nous abordons un sommet UE-Afrique qui, de mon point de vue, est d'une importance cruciale.
Merci beaucoup, M. Goren. Merci pour ces réflexions. And now I would like to ask Mr. Erastus Muencha to share with us his opinion, his thoughts as concerning, given your 2 mandates as the deputy chairperson of the African Union, what we should take into consideration when it comes to best practice to implement in the context of the African Union, European Union partnership in democracy and electoral support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator, and let me once again thank the panelists, distinguished panelists who have really touched at the core of the question that's before us. I think I want to mention one point that was underlined by my good friend Mansavisi. Starting with, since you asked me about my experience, investment. Where do you invest in this democratic space? Unfortunately, a lot more resources are invested in conflict management, but not in nurturing democracy. And this you see. And I think this also ties very well with the point that was raised by Mr. Goranis, who's speaking from, you mentioned the Strasbourg, when he talked about visibility of those that are involved, the actors. The point of investment, if we invest at the right time, in the right place, we'll get better outcome, because at the moment we seem to be crisis-driven, rather than anticipation of what we anticipate to get into society and investing in the right time. And so to me, that's a very important time. It's very easy to mobilize resources, both from European Commission or member states. If there is a crisis already in Mali, people are in the move and everything is disruptive, rather than anticipate and invest. And this is where mediation plays a role. This is where all the actors are mentioned. The second aspect, I think, that is coming out of it, where do you invest this? It's important, yes, to invest in nurturing democracy, but who do you invest And it's very clear that it must be at the local level, that you can empower the society to be able to feel the belonging, to feel the desire to participate, to feel the desire that they can only achieve what society's aspirations are together, and not, playing against the other. If civil society can act in that space, because they can reach the local level, they can be able to anticipate and confront the extremists and give the right information, because information only comes in when there is no proper, there is always demand for, where there is no information, there's no void, there is void, wrong information will come in. But when society is equipped, they will be. But then in empowering these societies, it is also important to make sure that they have trust, they have faith in the process. So then supporting the institutions, you don't have to be in the wrong hall. But of course, coming to election observation itself, this is a wrong investment also in a way, because the result election is not an event, it's a process which starts with, of course, the strength of political parties, the space political parties are given to express freely, so that the people can have faith in the outcome, and then the strength of electoral management bodies. And I think this is the crucial role that really this brings out, so that in the process of then anything going wrong, mediation then can kick in, and you then must have the proper actors that are going to act. Often when you look at Africa, and my colleague Calista did point out, the non-visibility of the European Union, as it was said, which is supporting, but also many electoral management organizations, including African Union, is because a lot of efforts, if you look at the peace and security architecture of the African Union, it has some of the elements which are not visible on the radar, and for reasons which are good. For instance, somebody mentioned here the case of Zambia last year. The role that was played by, say, former leaders, what you call the panel of the wise, who will go before elections are organized, to be able to confront the leaders, those, governments, because government, and it has been said here, play a very crucial role, because they have the instruments to organize credible elections. They have instruments to finance the electoral management bodies. They have the instruments to mobilize society, to give space to parties to be able to participate. But when you perceive something is not going right, it is only then you can deploy those institutional elements, which normally don't operate through what you might call media or megaphones, diplomacy, that can reach those and canvass and prevent. So that prevention must also have layers depending on, are you looking at the local level? Are you looking at those in management? Are you looking at all these aspects? In other words, you must understand the structure of society, where conflict is coming from, where the trigger is coming and going there. Then, of course, let me talk one aspect which I wanted to bring out here, and that is the need for coherence and therefore the need for this partnership. One of the lessons I learned, and I remember one time talking to late Kofi Annan when he was handling one of the countries that was going through transition. When you have many external actors, if they are not coherent, if they are not coordinated, and this was also talked about, it is a precise reason for also not managing that mediation process or coming to an end. Because the parties find reason to be talking the actors against each other. And so the need for coordination is extremely important. And that's why this seminar, which also contextualizes that we have member states supporting, working with the European Union, but also the European Union also being inclusive with all the actors on the ground, including institutions like ECAS and the rest, so that we all work for one purpose and go in the same direction. That is, the coordination of that is very important. I've been involved in election observations, involved in all the other management, and when you don't have that, the society is divided, the actors are divided, and the outcomes are never credible. And so this is an important element and one that we must nurture, and this is why it's so important to see these actors that can talk from different angles but have clearly convergence, as Mr. Masavis said. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Horace. So thank you, Horace, for this wise word and calling for coordinated effort between the different actors, which is paramount for success on especially mediation and electoral support. So I would like also to thank all the panelists for all the contributions that have made so far. We've been doing pretty well to recuperate the timing. However, since we would like also before to have a well-deserved coffee, open up a little bit the possibility for people if they have questions. And if there are people who have questions for the panelists, just say your name and then to whom you address the eventual questions, if any, before to go to coffee. Go ahead.
Quite a number of African countries. But for me, the question will now be also closely related to what His Excellency Erastus Mwencha had raised. The stakes, in terms of electoral processes in Africa, tends to be a trigger for a lot of these conflicts, as well. And it tends to also serve as a disenfranchisement for young persons that Sonia was also highlighting earlier on. And it has been a bit difficult to manage. We look at the Constitution, electoral laws, looking at ways to be able to put in place, the framework that will sort of incentivize, the high contention for especially elected positions. I don't know what you think. What sort of model has been adopted, looking at the European context now, that could be helpful for African countries or developing countries in that context, so that we are also able to manage this while promoting the inclusion of persons, young people, marginalized and minority groups. We're also able to manage these conflicts that we have.
Yes, Mr. Masavis.
Well, the question will require a lot of time. Simply, what I wanted to underline are a couple of points. First, don't be humble and don't pretend to have already the solution. The solution lies with the people, which are then supposed to build resilience, at least in this segment, And therefore, the first thing is to listen, to go to listen and to identify or help identifying who are the most credible drivers, because at the end of the day, it's a question of credibility of people. People are not bad or good. They are influenced at a certain moment. And you are absolutely right in saying that elections are the perfect ground, politics at large, are the perfect ground in which, resentment, disillusions, and manipulators are working. And from my perspective, the perspective I illustrated this morning, I'm watching at that from the preventive violent extremism, which will easily turn into terrorism. And therefore, from this point of view, it is crucial to act urgently, but not just one way off, but to have a network in place which is able to understand and to listen and to detect all the phenomena which are driving them to radicalization, to violent extremism, and eventually to terrorism. Therefore, first thing is that there is not a model which is suitable for everybody. I mean, the real, let's say, methodological approach is to be humble, to go, to listen, to identify, and then to empower. Then, obviously, to follow in order to understand what has been produced. Second is what Erastus said. I mean, coherence of actors, because I put that in the framework of the third block, election preparation. I mean, precisely because I wanted to underline how crucial is this moment, which very often is a bit on the shadow, no? Because everybody is concentrating on the polls, on the outcome. But it is essential to invest much more in the preparation, and preparation means a lot of things. I took one element important, which is to prevent every form of radicalization and elements which are driving towards this through action at community level. The reason why, GSEF is doing this financement of prevention of violent extremism at grassroots level, and the experience, Nigeria, but I could have also referred to Kenya, for example, or far away in the world, in Sri Lanka, for example, in the Philippines, where, there are all elements of mechanic, but differences in terms of actors, in terms of output, in terms of, let's say, feelings that you have to interpret it. But you have not to interpret it from outside. I mean, useless to put in motion observatories which are Brussels-driven, Washington-driven, or even Addis-driven. I mean, the important is to be plugged into a network of awareness and intervention which is sustainable at local level. This is, allow me to say, and close here, that in my long experience of the Commission, I've seen that this is extremely difficult for big institutions, including the Commission, to do it and even to finance. The European Union, through the Commission and the Member States, are financing GSEF, which is a global fund, I mean, basically, And I think that altogether are trying to identify this precisely because this is extremely difficult. And the reason why I wanted to underline big differences in investment, and in this one, I think it's still marginal, even if it doesn't require billions. It requires to be close to the ground, to be with the people, and to allow people to build resilience from inside. This is what I want to say. So not one solution for everybody. By the way, something similar is also advisable in our societies, where, we are not all the time equipped to understand exactly what's going on. And then I think that we are all living in turbulent times in which people are critical, full of hope, and full of disillusions. In these spaces, disruptive factors and terrorism find, an excellent ground, and I think they deserve a lot of engagement, awareness, and work altogether. This is the only thing I can say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manservisi, for this intervention. And then I think Sonia would like to contribute further.
Well, just to add on to that one point, now with the NDICI, there's the new regulation to do conflict analysis, and that's really important in terms of informing not only the programming and engagements for electoral support, but the general context. And if within that avenue, we actually consult and engage with young people as a part of that analysis, we're going to be much further sort of ahead in terms of the recommendations that Mr. Manservisi was saying. But I think it's something new, and it's worth bringing our awareness to, that we need to include and make sure it's youth-sensitive analysis that we're collecting.
Thanks a lot. I think we all deserve a coffee now. There might be some other question. We might keep it for the second panel. I would like to thank Mr. Gorenz from Strasbourg. Merci beaucoup pour votre intervention. Mr. Manservisi, Mr. Muencha, Sona Reyes, I will learn how to pronounce well your name, and Victoria Florinda. Thanks a lot, and a round of applause to all the panelists. Thank you. Sorry, just a little announcement. We have a coffee break waiting for us, and we try to reconvene in 15-20 minutes here. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Here since 3 hours, but I think the theme itself requires really our full attention, and it's warranted that we take a bit of a break in between, but I think we should get started. Welcome back to the last panel of the day. It's entitled The Future of the Africa-EU Partnership for Good Governance in 2022, How to Strengthen Electoral Processes to Consolidate Democracy and Prevent Conflicts. And it's a great pleasure to invite new panelists. We have Gilbert B. Bawara. He is the Minister of Public Administration, Labor and Social Dialogue in Togo. Très bienvenue, messieurs.
Merci.
We have also Monica Frassoni. She is the President of the European Center for Electoral Support, also with experience as a chief observer and member of the European Parliament. To my right is Mr. Calix Aristide Mbari. He's the acting Director for Governance and Conflict Prevention for the African Union Commission. And to my left, it's Cristina Castagnoli, Head of Unit Democracy and Election Actions for the European Parliament. I will read a framing question, but the panelists are also very welcome to go off script and give a contribution that speaks to the broader title of the seminar. The framing question reads, Italy, the European and African continent have vast but also different experiences of peace and conflict. Europe and Africa stand united in a common vision that conflict, it's the antidote of not only peace, but also prosperity and the well-being of people. Some countries are reaping the benefits from democracy more than others that are still on their way towards it. What are some of our most valuable lessons from the partnership until this day that we want to translate into both policy and program? And I will give the word first to Mr. Bawara. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame. Je crois que des échanges comme ceux-ci ne pouvaient pas mieux tomber en termes de partenariat Afrique-Europe, mais également en termes de questionnement sur la démocratie, les élections, l'état de droit, la résolution des conflits. Parce que nous échangeons à un moment où le continent africain, pratiquement dans toutes les parties du continent, il y a beaucoup d'agitation, il y a beaucoup de situations difficiles. Que ces situations se présentent sous forme de crise politique aiguë, voire même de conflits, et en même temps sur fond de propagation du djihadisme et du terrorisme. Et cela a servi d'ailleurs parfois dans certains pays de fondement pour des bouleversements politiques majeurs. Moi, je n'ai pas d'indication particulière, mais des questions. Tout à l'heure, je disais avec quelques amis pendant la pause que l'Afrique a connu jusqu'à présent 2 phases politiques majeures. Des années 1960, les années d'indépendance, jusqu'aux années 1990, où dans la plupart des pays africains, on a connu des systèmes de partis uniques. Et à partir des années 90, dans la foulée de la conférence de la Baule, il y a eu, je dirais plutôt des tentations de démocratisation et d'instauration de nouveaux systèmes de gestion des affaires publiques. Et aujourd'hui, nous voyons aussi qu'il y a beaucoup de bouleversements et même des remises en cause de tous les systèmes qui ont été essayés jusqu'à présent. Alors, la question que moi je me pose, 30 ans de parti unique, sans succès, sans résultat, 30 ans de pérégrination démocratique sans résultat tangible. Et maintenant, on voit qu'une autre phase commence avec parfois un peu de populisme, un peu de démagogie. Dans certaines parties du continent, on dit, bon, il faut retrouver la dignité, il faut revisiter les relations, les partenariats avec les autres parties du monde. Alors, ma question est celle-ci. Est-ce que ce n'est pas le moment pour le continent africain de marquer un arrêt et de s'interroger? De s'interroger sur quoi? Sur les réalités des sociétés africaines. Moi, je suis de ceux qui estiment que la question de la démocratie, la question de l'état de droit, la question de la bonne gouvernance, qui sont parmi les fondements, je pourrais ajouter le respect des droits de l'homme, qui sont parmi les fondements de la coopération et des partenariats entre le continent africain et notamment l'Europe, l'Union européenne en particulier, que ces questions ont été posées en désarticulation par rapport aux réalités des sociétés africaines. D'une part, parce que j'estime que les États africains sont en construction. Aujourd'hui, il n'y a pratiquement pas d'État qui peut dire qu'il maîtrise son territoire, qu'il contrôle tout son territoire. Ce qui signifie que nous sommes encore en construction des États. Parce qu'un État, c'est d'abord un territoire qu'on maîtrise, ce qui n'est pas encore le cas. Rares sont les pays africains qui peuvent dire qu'ils sont parvenus à bâtir des nations. Je ne vais pas revenir sur la conférence de Berlin, la manière dont les frontières ont été découpées, le fait que sur les mêmes territoires se retrouvent parfois des groupes de population, qu'on les appelle des ethnies ou des communautés, entre lesquelles il n'y a pas nécessairement un engagement collectif du vivre ensemble. Ce qui signifie qu'il faut concomitamment bâtir les États, avec tous les attributs que cela suppose, bâtir des nations en amenant toutes les populations qui habitent sur le territoire d'un pays à se considérer comme des frères et des sœurs. Et ensuite, il faut voir les systèmes politiques qu'il faudrait édifier, non pas comme des modèles parfaits en tant que tels, mais par rapport aux objectifs de développement économique et social que les pays africains et les sociétés africaines doivent poursuivre. Alors, c'est des questions pour moi parce que j'ai le sentiment que nous ne nous sommes pas suffisamment, en tant qu'Africains, posé des questions sur ce que nous étions, nos réalités culturelles, historiques, sociologiques, les destinées vers lesquelles nous voulions aller, en bâtissant des États, en bâtissant des nations et en forgeant des systèmes politiques qui permettraient d'assurer le développement économique et social. Alors, je prendrai l'exemple de mon pays, le Togo. 1960-1990, un régime de parti unique. 1990, conférence nationale souveraine, et on a adopté une constitution qui est le fondement et le soubassement du régime politique et de la démocratisation du pays, en prenant une partie des réalités politiques françaises, allemandes, américaines. On a pris un peu de tout et on a accolé, on a fait une constitution qui n'a jamais marché jusqu'à aujourd'hui. Si je prends d'autres pays africains, c'est la même chose. Il y a des constitutions formelles, mais qui ne veulent rien dire par rapport à la grande masse des populations, généralement qui n'ont pas le même niveau d'ouverture sur le monde pour comprendre les concepts que nous manipulons. Alors, moi, je voudrais que nous échangions ici pour savoir si nous ne pouvons pas refonder le partenariat entre l'Europe et l'Afrique en marquant une pause et en nous posant les questions sur les fondements de ce partenariat. Parce que nos amis européens vont continuer à dire bon, notre partenariat est fondé sur un certain nombre de principes que j'ai évoqués tout à l'heure, la démocratie, la bonne gouvernance, l'état de droit, qui sont des concepts qui ne sont pas nécessairement intériorisés et appropriés de la même manière qu'ils sont entendus et pratiqués ailleurs. Alors, donc, je vais plutôt m'arrêter là en souhaitant que de nos échanges, il y ait une interpellation qui nous aide mutuellement, l'Europe et l'Afrique, à nous interroger sur les fondements du partenariat et de la coopération que nous voulons bâtir, pour que certaines situations qu'on observe aujourd'hui, y compris en Afrique de l'Ouest, ne puissent se reproduire ou être amplifiées ou pérennisées. Voilà les quelques observations liminaires que j'aimerais faire et éventuellement, au cours des échanges, on pourrait approfondir l'un ou l'autre des aspects de mes interrogations et de mes questionnements. Et ce n'est pas vraiment des pistes de solutions que je propose en tant que telles. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Highlighting the issue of lack of territorial control, and this is something that of course means that conflict can always prevail in those territories. Also call for self-reflection, that it's a good moment to look deeper into the partnership and see how the values and goals are actually translated into actions, and underlining the discrepancy between the collective action that we would like to see in our societies and the way it's also translated and legislated and the way it plays out at the institutional level. And with that, I would like to pass directly to Ms. Monica Frassoni for your reflections, either on the question posed or well beyond your own experiences. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for this great occasion to be here. For me, as president of European Center for Electoral Support, is also a big element of pride to be here today and to be able also to exchange not only on what a lot of people consider only a technical issue, that is to say electoral assistance, but just to show how far beyond the simple technicalities this question goes to touch very deep issues like the one that the previous speaker just touched. Et sur ça, je voudrais lui dire que plus ou moins en 1870 ou 80, un monsieur qui s'appelait Massimo d'Azeglio a dit: maintenant, on a fait l'Italie, il faut faire les Italiens. Et on n'a pas encore fini. Donc, cette question de la construction des nations par rapport à leurs institutions, c'est vraiment une histoire qui est toujours en marche et que je ne pense pas qu'il peut être définie comme quelque chose de fermé ou défini. And that is why I believe that while I fully agree that there is the need, not only for Africa, but also for the European Union to reconsider in the light of a very unstable peace we are living today, at least in our continent and in part of the world, to review not only its own relations, but also the way in which this issue of democracy and governance is seen in the perspective of economic and social growth and of all the global challenges that we are envisaging. I also believe that in this re-examination, we should not run the risk, and I'm not saying that Mr. Minister were doing it, to relativize the global and the universal value of certain issues like freedom, rights, the right to be governed fairly, the openness and transparency.
because this is not something that is relatively to culture. It is something that is positive from wherever you see it, no matter what culture you have. And this is not at all a kind of Western imposition, because I believe that this is an issue and is a question, but I believe that this strive for liberty and for freedom and for well-being is there for all peoples of the world, but it has to be adapted and it has to be declined in a way that today probably is not properly right. And this is something, just to answer the question of Victoria, that I could also draw from my own experience, which is, of course, much more limited than the one that a lot of people can share here, in relation to the work of electoral observation and assistance. In terms of, because many years ago already, when electoral assistance was not existing among the programs of the European Union, I had the chance of being chief observers in 2 countries, which are not in Africa, but in Latin America. And there, for me, it was extremely clear that without linking the observation to some kind of follow-up, but also stepping up, it was very, very difficult that this kind of observation would be more than just an episode in the relation with a country that probably would forget immediately after what the observation had resulted to. And also the credibility of what the European Union does in terms of observation becomes much more meaningful if the programs of electoral assistance can count on good practitioners, good implementation, but also on a framework that is based on a valuable and effective political dialogue, which is done from the institution of the European Union in cooperation with the member states, because as somebody said, if the donors, or in any case, those who are working around the electoral process are not in agreement with each other, then the possibility of not having a credible system of assistance and observation just makes even more difficult and even weaker the capacity of these instruments to help with the governance of the different countries, and there is an increasing, and there is the risk, which is not only a risk, in some cases it does exist, with a lack of trust of those who are actually fighting for more democracy in those countries to rely, or at least to be able to count on some kind of help and assistance by the international community. And I want to insist on this because I believe that one of the questions that are more difficult for me to tackle is exactly the lack or the decreasing credibility of the action of the European Union, but in general the global community in terms of help for human rights and democracy in different crisis places, not only because there are conflicts, but because, as somebody already said, the concept of democracy itself is weakening. And there is no accident for that. It's not that it is just happening like this. It's because in some places, in some cases also in our countries, democracy does not work. It does not bring the results that are that are expected, and therefore the trust of people diminishes. So I believe that one of the most important elements of a working electoral system is exactly to help democracy work. Of course, I know everybody said it, elections are not the only element that are important in the definition of a democracy. In order to have a thriving democracy and therefore credible elections, you need to have a system of financing that is transparent, that is not giving too much advantage to some in relation to others, that is fair. You need a press that is free. You need all sorts of elements that can concur to make elections work. And in some cases, we were too lenient on the other elements, and therefore the exercise of democracy was disappointing, with very big backlash on the credibility of the whole process. So this is what makes also our work as practitioner of election assistance so interesting and so important beyond the technicalities, because you have to talk with actually and to work for the beneficiaries and with the donors in order to make sure that also those steps are somehow reflected in the result and what you actually do, and also the credibility of the whole process is actually transparently possible to be judged. And if it is not, and there is why the election observation is so key and why the election observation is so important, it has to be possible to say it. It has to be possible to express clearly this process is not working as it should. And this process should be improved in a way that does not, of course, only depend from the practitioners of electoral assistance and from the program that the European Union, in this case, is presenting, but also from a very committed political dialogue that is there from the part of the European Union and of its member states, because this has been one of the most interesting conclusions that I took from my own experience as both observer and electoral assistant provider, and that is that when this political dialogue is not there, it is much more difficult to implement the recommendations, because we cannot push for constitutional reforms. We cannot push for rules reforms if we don't have the support and if you don't have the framework of a good political dialogue. So just to conclude, I think that we are all participating to this big challenge of making democracy live in the world, but this is not an end in itself. We know that all sorts of policies that have to do with the global challenges like climate, inequalities, poverties, and indeed transparency need a thriving democracy. It is an illusion to think that authoritarian countries can lead to better welfare and to better economic development. And there are too many people, including in Africa, but increasingly in Europe, who believe that this is the case. And we have, by proving that democracy can work and election can be fair and transparent, prove the contrary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. I think a display of anything but a limited experience and career working precisely on these issues. You started out by raising the issue of citizenship, which was also something that Emanuela Del Re mentioned, and it's a topic in itself, but it comes down to identity and how the nation and the state can work in harmony, and who is the nation and what it's composed by. And it's also signaling diversity and the need to respect diversity, which are universal values are about, with respect for diversity and human rights, and to build a political system that can translate this into policies and into institutions. You also spoke of the virtue of political dialogue and to use election observation and assistance as a facilitator, as an infrastructure that political dialogue can use and to assist to solve issues that are contentions and lies at the heart of the democracy. So political dialogue is what should be the surrounding layer to all electoral activities, and it has an intrinsic value itself, as dialogue always does. Thank you very much again. I'll hand over now to Mr. Calix Aristide Mbari, to my right.
Merci beaucoup. Bien, je dois dire d'emblée que nous sommes en train de parler du renforcement du partenariat. Du renforcement du partenariat Union africaine, Union européenne, et dans le cas d'espèce, le rôle que des institutions comme ECES peuvent jouer dans le renforcement de ce partenariat. Et nous sommes d'accord que ce partenariat s'articule autour des questions des élections, mais de façon plus globale, n'est-ce pas, le renforcement de la culture démocratique, du renforcement de la gouvernance démocratique en Afrique, je dois préciser. Alors, partant de ce postulat, je dois dire que l'Union africaine, comme vous le savez, a en place un cadre légal extraordinaire pour promouvoir la démocratie, promouvoir la gouvernance démocratique sur le continent. Ces instruments, au nombre de ces instruments, je peux citer l'acte constitutif de l'Union africaine, qui est le document de référence, qui est l'acte de référence de l'organisation. Mais vous avez la charte sur la démocratie, les élections et la gouvernance, qui est un document essentiel, qui prend en compte tous les aspects que nous sommes en train d'évoquer. Donc, des encouragements aux gouvernants, des encouragements aux acteurs non étatiques, des encouragements à la société civile. Au fait, il s'agit d'un pacte entre les gouvernants et les gouvernés autour de la promotion des valeurs démocratiques. Mais au-delà de cela, on se pose la question, pourquoi est-ce que certaines choses ne marchent pas et qu'on en vienne à faire des recommandations pour changer les choses? En clair, on se demande pourquoi est-ce qu'avec tous ces principes qui promeuvent la démocratie, la bonne gouvernance, le rejet de changements anticonstitutionnels au gouvernement, qui donnent un rôle à la société civile à jouer, aux acteurs traditionnels, etc., à tout le monde. Pourquoi est-ce qu'on en arrive à des situations de crise, des situations qui nous obligent chaque fois à réfléchir un modèle? Le ministre Bawara l'a dit, de réfléchir à un modèle comme réponse à cette situation-là. C'est une grande question qui se pose et il est important qu'on puisse y réfléchir. Alors maintenant, si on revient au contexte des élections en tant que telles, il faut dire qu'il est essentiel que la question du dialogue, la question de l'inclusivité soit véritablement prise en compte. On a vu dans certains pays où, par exemple, les modifications de constitution telles qu'initiées n'avaient absolument rien d'illégal, parce que la voie constitutionnelle a été suivie. Et pourtant, cela nous a amené à des problèmes. Mais pourquoi? Parce qu'il y a la question de la moralité, la question de l'opportunité de ces révisions constitutionnelles, de ces démarches, qui pour la plupart ne prennent pas en compte cette préoccupation d'inclusivité, donc des consultations à l'interne, le dialogue à l'interne. Et cela amène beaucoup de problèmes et on a vu que cela a même conduit à des changements anticonstitutionnels, notamment des mouvements populaires, il faut être précis, qui ont eu raison justement de ces régimes. Je ne vais pas les citer, mais il y en a eu plusieurs sur le continent. Cela nous amène également à nous poser des questions sur l'efficacité de ces mécanismes-là, mais également leur mise en œuvre. Et lorsque nous voyons ces dernières années cette resurgence des changements anticonstitutionnels au gouvernement, on se pose des questions véritables. Pourquoi est-ce que subitement l'Afrique est en train de faire face à tout cela? Quelles en sont les raisons? Quelles en sont les causes réelles? Est-ce que c'est un défaut de gouvernance? Est-ce que cela est dû à des élections mal organisées? Est-ce qu'il y a eu d'autres facteurs qui ont contribué à cela? Si oui, lesquels? Est-ce que ce sont des facteurs qui sont contenus au niveau de ces pays ou du continent, ou bien est-ce que cela vient d'ailleurs? Je pose des questions comme ça, mais sans véritablement avoir les réponses. Parce que je me dis, en y réfléchissant Et lorsque nous le faisons, nous devons prendre pays par pays pour nous en rendre compte des réalités. Parce que les réalités ne sont pas les mêmes selon que nous évoluons d'un pays à l'autre. Et la dynamique aussi. Donc, voilà quelques questions que je voudrais poser, comme ça, pour nous permettre de réfléchir. L'Union africaine, et nous l'avons vu ce matin lors des échanges, l'Union africaine, depuis les élections de la Zambie, a mis en place un système, c'est-à-dire de coupler l'observation électorale avec des missions de médiation. Cela ne se fait pas de façon systématique dans tous les pays qui ont des élections, mais des pays où il y a des risques, il y a un potentiel de crise. Et ces missions-là restent après que les observateurs soient partis, pour engager la discussion, la réflexion avec les acteurs politiques. Et dans le cas de la Zambie, mais on s'est rendu compte que le régime qui avait perdu le pouvoir avait une certaine peur d'être victimisé par le nouveau pouvoir. Et si cela n'était pas contenu, si cela n'est pas contenu, eh bien ça peut créer des frictions et ouvrir, n'est-ce pas, le pont à une autre crise. Et les nouveaux également qui arrivent veulent que les choses se passent rapidement, mais parfois au détriment d'un certain nombre de minima. Alors donc ces missions sont là pour permettre justement à ce que les gens se parlent. Et dans le cas de la Zambie, on a vu que ça a porté du fruit. Nous avons fait la même chose en Gambie, et nous comptons désormais faire la même chose là où nous pensons qu'il y a un fort potentiel de crise. Alors ça, c'est un mécanisme qui vient s'ajouter à ce que l'Union africaine fait déjà, donc la diplomatie préventive, qui consiste à envoyer, à déployer des missions de haut niveau dans les pays dont on n'est pas très sûr que les élections pourraient bien se passer, dans des pays où il y a des blocages, n'est-ce pas, au niveau du processus, du fait de l'opposition, du fait du parti au pouvoir, etc., afin de permettre justement à ce que les choses puissent se débloquer et avancer rapidement. Mais tout cela se fait, et pour que nous ayons une bonne élection, qu'on associe également les jeunes, les femmes, tout le monde, toutes les organisations de la société civile, afin de pouvoir atteindre le bon objectif. Ceci est comme le décor que j'ai posé, mais je vais aller très droit au but pour dire quels sont les domaines dans lesquels nous pouvons travailler ensemble, puisque nous parlons de coopération, nous parlons de partenariat. La promotion du dialogue est un aspect essentiel. Comment est-ce que nous allons pouvoir mettre ça en place? Eh bien, il ne faut pas que nous ayons des sons discordants, que nous n'ayons pas de sons discordants. Et c'est ça le sens du partenariat. Lorsque, par exemple, l'Union africaine estime que, bon, la situation est telle, après consultation, mais il ne faut pas qu'on revienne pour faire des déclarations ou des prises de position qui remettraient en cause ce qui a été fait par le principe de subsidiarité. C'est vrai que ça ne bloque pas les uns et les autres de pouvoir s'exprimer, mais il est essentiel que dans le cadre du partenariat, on puisse avoir ce dialogue-là et permettre à ce qu'on parle d'une seule voix. Ça, c'est un élément essentiel. Le deuxième élément, à mon avis, c'est la collaboration sur le terrain qui se fait, pour la plupart, entre Union européenne et Union africaine de façon générale. Lorsque nous arrivons sur le terrain, nous partageons les informations, nous échangeons, et je crois que ça, c'est une bonne pratique qui mérite de se poursuivre. Pour ce qui concerne ECAIS, par exemple, je crois qu'il est essentiel que des choses comme la formation des observateurs de longue durée, la formation des observateurs de courte durée, soient promues, soient maintenues comme un des éléments essentiels pour renforcer leurs capacités dans justement le travail d'observation qu'ils font sur le terrain. le renforcement des capacités des organismes chargés des élections, les commissions électorales, les cours constitutionnels, tous les autres services qui travaillent pour la réussite des processus électoraux, y compris la société civile, dans le travail de sensibilisation de l'opinion nationale, les médias, donc tout cela qui travaille dans ce sens. Mais bien évidemment, cela doit se faire dans une bonne coordination, dans le cadre de ce partenariat, et que cela soit établi dans un programme d'action précis. Il faudrait bien que nous nous entendions sur, par exemple, quel pays nous allons appuyer en 2022, en quoi va consister justement cet appui, qu'est-ce que nous allons faire réellement, pratiquement, de sorte que, de part et d'autre, nous sachions quelles sont nos obligations, qu'est-ce que nous devons faire. La transparence est un élément essentiel dans le partenariat pour permettre justement d'avoir des résultats escomptés. Le déploiement d'experts est un élément essentiel. Déploiement d'experts pour accompagner les organismes chargés des élections, déploiement d'experts dans les pays en transition. Et quand je parle de déploiement d'experts, je ne vois pas seulement des experts électoraux. Déployer les experts pour appuyer le processus d'élaboration ou de révision de la Constitution. Mais ça fait partie du dispositif. Ça fait partie du processus électoral. C'est un élément, un maillon de la chaîne du processus électoral. Parce que lorsque la Constitution est élaborée à temps, révisée à temps, ça permet justement, et puis avec de bons experts, ça permet de jeter les bases de la mise en place d'un cadre légal et institutionnel qui soit des plus cohérents pour le processus électoral. Mais bien d'autres experts également sont concernés par ce dispositif. Donc un programme spécifique porté sur les pays en transition est un élément crucial pour justement permettre la réussite des processus électoraux. Le partage d'expérience. Il faudrait bien qu'on apprenne là où ça se passe bien pour transposer ailleurs et qu'on apprenne également là où ça s'est mal passé, qu'on sache pourquoi est-ce qu'on n'a pas pu atteindre les objectifs et voir comment est-ce qu'on peut les corriger. Je crois que le partage d'expérience est un élément essentiel à prendre en compte justement dans ce dispositif. L'appui financier, je ne parlerai pas de ça puisque cela va de soi que s'il n'y a pas d'appui financier, mais avec toutes vos bonnes élaborations, mais vous ne pourrez rien faire sur le terrain. L'argent, il paraît que c'est le nerf de la guerre. Hein? Et si vous n'avez pas de ressources, vous aurez tous vos projets dans le sac et puis rien ne se fera. En attendant, les changements anticonstitutionnels pourront se poursuivre. Hein? La culture démocratique pourrait être renvoyée aux oubliettes. Et puis donc voilà. Donc voilà un peu de façon générale. J'ai voulu être pratique, hein? Lancer la question de cette façon-là pour permettre justement à ce que nous puissions apporter plus d'éclaircissement là-dessus. Mais je dois vous dire que le continent actuellement fait face à des difficultés avec cette résurgence de changement anticonstitutionnel au gouvernement et qu'il y a urgence à agir. À l'heure où je vous parle, par exemple au Mali, les équipes sont en train d'être déployées de la CEDEAO, des Nations Unies, etc., pour aider à revoir, à redéfinir le chronogramme électoral. À redéfinir le chronogramme électoral. Donc, si nous devons aller au Mali, Fabio, je crois que c'est maintenant qu'il faut y aller. C'est maintenant qu'il faut aller au Mali si nous voulons appuyer le processus au Mali afin d'espérer avoir de bonnes élections plus tard. Et c'est pareil pour le Tchad, c'est pareil pour tous les autres pays en transition, en plus des autres pays qui risquent de nous poser pas poser de problèmes, mais qui sont potentiellement, qui méritent d'être suivis. Hein. Il y a le Kenya, il y a l'Angola, hein. Il y a quelques pays qui méritent que nous puissions leur accorder une attention particulière cette année, et nous devons faire très rapidement pour aller à l'essentiel. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Very good recommendations and very concrete. We thank you very much for that. Calling for deeper analysis to understand better the motives of these undemocratic, unconstitutional transition. Also underlining the value of coupling observation, election observation with mediation, and by doing so apply some also moral pressure on leaders to remain within the realms of democracy and the code they have signed. Calling for deeper cooperation and also the value of deploying expertise, technical expertise, all around the electoral cycle, starting with the constitutional making or redrafting. And lastly, the value of continuing the dialogue, even in the face of challenges, and how to really maximize our comparative advantages between the African Union and the European Union. Thank you very much again. I will now hand over to Cristina Casagnoli, who will be our last speaker of the day, after which we will close the panel. Cristina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victoria. It's difficult to be the last obstacle between you and your lunch, but I would try to make it short and maybe also be a little bit provocative and also self-critical on several issues. Première chose, je voulais dire à M. Mbari que je renouvelle les condoléances du Parlement européen pour la mort de Guy Cyril Tapoko, qui était mon collègue, qui s'occupait de l'observation électorale pour l'Union africaine. On a travaillé beaucoup d'années ensemble, donc je renouvelle les condoléances, M. Mbari. Le Parlement européen observe les élections en Afrique depuis the European Parliament is observing election in Africa since 1996. So more than 60 elections have been observed. Myself, I've observed around 20 elections in the last years, and I can tell you that I have a mixed feeling. You have cases like Gambia or Zambia or Ghana where we can call it success story. Then you have election like the one in Ethiopia in 2005. Maybe people will remember that for some have been a disaster, for some others, big success. And there are now kids, young girls that are called Anna, and are now 15 years old, called Anna out of Anna Gomes, who was our chief observer at that time, that made an impact, such an impact that many, many girls have her name. And then you had catastrophe observation, like in Gabon, where our chief observer was spied and there were fake news about her meeting the opposition secretly in an hotel with newspapers, really harassing the mission and expelling our experts. So it's really a story of mixed feelings. And then here, what I would like to tell you is as Victoria was asking, to give you some reflection and maybe on how to do better, and try to make sure that these two communities, that election observers and the ones who are doing the assistance to the election, speak more to each other. Very often people call us, the observers, the Talibans, the Orthodox, that we just want to observe. We cannot use the word mediation. So if I use the word mediation with my colleagues in the IS, they will cut my head. So. But the reality is more gray. It's a gray area where even in countries, like I was mentioning before with Stefano, the case of Honduras, where we were there to do observation, but we've been obliged to do mediation because we were in the middle of almost a civil war where a chief observer of extreme left was telling the people that a president of extreme right won the election, and in doing so, she really prevented the civil war. She said there were not frauds. But for doing so, you have to be credible. You have to also think that you are not only there to present your findings, press conference, and then go, but everything is a process. And this idea of what Monica was saying, we need more follow-up. This idea of not only concentrating on election day, but consider the election in the electoral cycle, this now is a reality. This is really something that is in the agenda of the election observation community. And in the last years, the EAS has done a lot of progress also in being more consistent in this follow-up, in also setting up a database with recommendations. So I think a lot of work has been done. But if you look at Africa, we still see that only 15% of recommendations are implemented, and 20% are partially implemented. So the rate is still very low. We have example of Nigeria, where we keep observing since 2003, and no recommendations are not implemented. So someone wonder why we keep going to observing election in Nigeria. It's very expensive, and then you know how this logic works. Being in a country is also a question of visibility for the European Union, is also a question of being heavyweight. So when I was in the cabinet of Lady Ashton and proposing my colleagues in the geographical not to go to Nigeria, they were saying, Nigeria, you have to observe Nigeria, you have to be there. But this is not what should be behind a logic when you decide to observe an election. The logic should be the impact that you can have. And where we have noticed that the recommendation have an higher implementation rate, very often this is related with well-resourced and independent election management bodies, is what Mr. Mbari was referring to. This really a very positive correlation. When the election management body works and well-financed and independent, the recommendations are implemented. And this is why it's good that ECES is working in your project a lot with these management bodies. Then another positive correlation between the implementation rate and so the good implementation rate is when the domestic civil society and the citizen observers are strong. Because when we leave, they stay and they make sure that the point that we have raised in the recommendation are high on the agenda. And there, again, I know that you are working with the citizens observers, and more, especially in this time of COVID, when we couldn't really go and observe, we rely a lot on the work of the citizens observers. So continue to bridge all these links is very important, because citizen observers, as you know, they faced a lot of pressure in the country observed. When I was in Mozambique in 2019, the head of the local observers was killed by the police, and we knew that it was by the police because the police had a car accident just after the killing. So we went to see the president of the Mozambique, asking to launch an investigation, that we knew that he was killed by the police, and our chief observer made a clear statement about that. So protecting the citizen observers and make sure that they have the resources to work, I think is really key. Then I wanted also to say a word about our cooperation with the African Union. I know that it improved in the last years. There are also projects between the African Union and European Union. It's clear that for you it's more difficult because you observe your own member states, and we don't. So sometimes it's easier for us to say things that you cannot say. But it's true also that you have a bigger role. I know that you develop conflict prevention, mediation, technical assistance, so you don't do only observation. And this sometimes is the problem. It's something that is cleavage that also happen when UN is involved. When UN came with us to observe the election in Iraq, At the same time, they were the one providing assistance to the Iraqi system. At the same time, they're also observing. So it's not easy. So that's why we can be the bad guys sometimes. When we observe, we can tell the truth, maybe more than you, but we know that you are behind, that you are there. And at the end, even if election observation cannot be mediation, as we said, but it's clear that mediation is needed and conflict prevention is needed. I think we are proud that this European Parliament, the first that asked the conflict prevention people in the EU institution and the election observation people to sit together around the same table a couple of years ago and to speak more to each other. And to also have, because sometimes you have your chief observer that is in the middle of a conflict situation and has no means, no ability, no staff that can help him on that. So on this, talking more between the conflict prevention community, the election observation community, the election assistance community, the democracy support community, all of that, they really have to work together, because at the end, the main of the election observation is implementing the recommendation, helping the country to reform the system, and going there and just putting fingers is not the objective of our work. And just to finish on 3 challenges that we have ahead of us in this period of pandemic, we see how important the local observation is, because we couldn't go and observe in the last couple of years. We observed just really few elections. Also, the challenge of the fake observation, because you know that more and more you have institutions really like champignon popping up, and we saw, for example, in Mozambique that Russia was behind some of these institutions. They were even teaching how to cheat the European Union observers because they know the way we work. So we spoke with people that knew that the answer they have to give us. And speaking with various interlocutors, we understood that the Russians were intervening in this respect. And this is really something scary, because we have to be credible as international observers, and these fake observations are really awful. And the third challenge, of course, is digitalization in Africa of the elections. As you know, in the European Union, we are going back to paper. So even countries like the Netherlands that have had the digital, now they're back to paper because they fear the hackers, etc. And in Africa, more and more, everything is digitalized. And this is a question mark. How do you observe a black box? Can you really say that you observe properly the elections? And there is still a big debate that we are having, because we don't want to have experts that have access to the system, because we don't want to be the one who certify that the system is correct or not correct. It's not our job. We are just observers. But for example, we could observe the tenders, how this machine has been selected. I mean, there's other ways to do this, and to address all these challenges and all of that. The Parliament is launching this year an initiative report by the two co-presidents of my election democracy group, Mr. Tobe and Mr. McAllister. They are the chair of Foreign Affairs Committee and Development Committee. We will launch this debate and this resolution on the future of democracy support, election observation, try to really push the other institution to think that is really the moment to rethink the way we work. The methodology of election observation last of the year 2000. So for me, there's also a margin of maneuver of improving the links between us as observer and you as provider of electoral assistance. So this is my message to you. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm happy that now you can all go to lunch.
Thank you, Cristina. I'm just going to sum up a couple of your key points, and then we will indeed let everybody go to lunch that's served just across the hall. Success can be achieved, but it's relative. So for how long will success really last? The two communities, mediation and elections, they're certainly two different communities, but they should meet because they inevitably will on the ground, so it's better to be prepared. Invest in EMBs, they're centrally located and their capacities never waste. The lack of follow-up to recommendations can sometimes even delegitimize the practice itself, so it's very important, and there the practitioner community has a role to play. Also an acknowledgement of the constraints when you observe your own members. And finally, which may sum up all of the contributions today, is that there is still a lot of work to do together, identifying, understanding each other's comparative advantage, and the role and the value of the technical expertise that is deployed. So I think ECAS should also really develop new pathways to embody and drive electoral assistance forward, which seems to be very much needed. Thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch. Merci beaucoup. Merci à vous. Merci.